this is information about the argumentative essay on the AP Language and Composition exam, and it's also going to guide what we're doing basically for the rest of the quarter. So let's take a look at the argument essay. Okay, so the third question, the third essay question on the AP exam is an argument question. So far we've talked about the rhetorical analysis question, and that one asks students to assess the argument of somebody else, and in that section you have to make a claim and provide evidence to prove it. The argumentative essay is all about asking you to choose a side on a particular topic and providing evidence and arguing about that topic. Okay, so what is an argument? It is an opinion or a claim that is supported by evidence. So the evidence that we talked about in the rhetorical analysis section, historical, scientific, anecdotal, all of that evidence that you learned about being able to pick out in other people's writing, is the kind of evidence that you need to use in the argumentative timed right. It's what makes the argumentative timed right both more challenging and at the same time easier than the rhetorical analysis one, because you have to provide your own evidence, which this is what makes it more challenging, which means that you have to be able to pull from a variety of different sources, and you have to have those available in your mind, not something that you can study in the moment. So when you are presented with the argumentative timed right, the first thing you want to do is read over the prompt multiple times to make sure you understand what the prompt is asking you. It'll usually it'll give you a situation. For example, it might say something about sports and politics. So it could give you background of in 2012, the Miami Heat put down their basketballs and took up their hoodies in order to protest the shooting of Trayvon Martin. So it'll give you a little bit of background, and then it'll say something like, a writer from the New York Times attested that athletes in sports were finally taking the time to talk about things that mattered, right? And then you have to decide, do you agree that politics and sports should be combined, or do you disagree? And that's basically what the essay is about. So what I suggest you do is you think about both sides of the argument. And before you do a timed right and argumentative timed right, I'll walk you through this. You kind of do a T-chart. And you say, what are some arguments I could make in favor of politics and sports? What are some arguments that I could make that would be opposed to politics and sports, so that you understand both sides of the argument, because you need to also present that you know both sides of the argument. So you need to have reasoning and evidence that supports what it is that you're saying. I'll walk you through that in a second. Okay. So when you read the prompt, you think to yourself, do I agree with the speaker? Do I think the speaker is totally wrong? Or do I think some of what was said was correct and some was incorrect? That's going to change the way that you answer that question, because the question will ask you to defend, challenge, or qualify what is being said in the question. So if you decide you're going to defend what is being said, then you are going to support what the person's position on the topic is. If you are challenging, then that means that you're going to argue against what the position is. And if you are qualifying, you're basically saying that sometimes this is right and sometimes this position is not right. So it argues basically both points, and you do both the defend and the challenging essay together, I guess, in one essay. It's kind of like where you're looking at an argument and you say, well, it depends on the situation. If your answer to the question is it depends, then you probably want to think about qualifying and giving, sometimes the situation is true in this sense, but it's false in this other sense. Okay. So all of that evidence that we've already talked about so far are events that you can use and evidence that you can use to support your argumentative essay. Historical, scientific, current events, pop cultural evidence, allusions from literature or the Bible, your experience, anecdotal evidence, anything that comes from your readings in all of your classes, you kind of want to pull into this. I've seen some people write some very good argumentative essays using evidence that they brought in from their microbiology class or from physics, and they use it as evidence in AP Lang and Comp. So it's not just what we read here, it's what you're looking at in all of your classes. AP US History is also a really good, and regular US History are really good sources too for you to find historical evidence to support your opinion on whatever the topic is. Okay, so one step that you can make sure that you do is start thinking of a group of things that you can pull evidence from. So don't just think about this class, think about all your classes. Think about your own personal stories. Think about things that you've seen in movies or books or music or current global affairs or things that are happening in our own backyard, local events. All of those places are places that you can pull evidence from. And getting appropriate evidence is the hardest part of the argumentative essay. Okay, let me show you kind of how it's set up. So in planning the argumentative essay, we will be working in the days ahead on making a thesis statement. So a thesis statement will be coming up in the next slide that you're going to be doing for your argumentative essay is not a SOAP statement. That's rhetorical analysis. This thesis statement is where you give your side of the opinion, and I'm asking you to do a split thesis statement, which means you also provide what the other side says. That's what that speak to the opposing view is. You want to make sure you have supporting evidence, and you want to determine what is your strongest piece of evidence. I always suggest to people that they use emphatic organization. Emphatic organization means that you use your second strongest piece of evidence first. You put your weakest piece of evidence in the center of the body, and you end with your strongest argument. The only situation where I say that won't work is if you're worried you're going to run out of time for the essay, in which case then do 1, 3, 2. Strongest piece of evidence first, weakest in the center, second strongest at the end. Because if you run out of time and you don't have time to write about your strongest piece of evidence, that's kind of a shame. Okay, so these are the parts. Again, we'll go over this more in detail at a later date, but I wanted you to have an introduction to it today. So you'll have an introductory paragraph for your timed right. You'll have a split thesis where it shows both sides of the issue. Although many people believe X, that's the opposing side, it is clear that in today's world, X, that's your side. That's what a split thesis is. Okay. And then any background information that you know about the topic can go into the introduction. But if you don't know a lot of background information, you don't have to include a lot of background information, maybe a sentence or two in the introduction. You want to think about this as being a classic introduction. So whereas the rhetorical analysis essay tests your ability to find someone else's writing interesting, the argumentative essay tests your ability to write well. So this is the one that the AP readers are looking at to see what kind of writer you are and how strong of a writer you are. So you want to make sure you do all your rhetorical flourishes, you have a good introduction, attention getter that kind of transitions into the topic, and then ending with your thesis in the introductory paragraph. This one also has confirmation paragraphs. These are paragraphs that are basically the body paragraphs of your paper. It's the most important and the longest section of the argumentative writing, and it's where you include your reasoning and your evidence. So it should show a logical development from one idea to the other, And we're going to work on using transitions to do that. This quarter, we're really going to focus in on making claims, using evidence to support those claims, transitioning from one claim to the next in a way that guides a reader through your paper. So with the body section, you want to think, I've made a claim. Here's my reason supporting that claim. Here's the evidence that supports that reason. So I believe in this. I believe in this because here's the evidence to show why I'm right. That's kind of the idea for the body paragraphs for the argumentative essay. Okay, then there is another part before you conclude, which is the concession and refutation section. This is where you provide the alternative argument. So in an argumentative essay, these argumentative essays, the readers want to see that you understand that there are two sides to every issue and that you present the opposing viewpoint. You can find weaknesses within the opposing reasons. Like, this is what the opposing side says, and this is why that's wrong or they're mistaken on it. But you can also say that they're sometimes right. That's concession. So yes, the opposing side shows this, and in many cases, I agree with them, but in this situation, blah, blah, blah. That's a refutation. That's where you take the opposing argument, you say why they're wrong, you refute it. So you can concede or refute in the introductory paragraphs or through the body paragraphs as you go through it. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we discuss this in detail. Okay, concluding paragraph, that's big picture. And that's the same for every timed write that you are going to have in AP Lang and Comp this year, whether it's rhetorical analysis, whether it's argumentative, or the third one that we'll talk about, which is synthesis. Your conclusion should always be big picture, should never be summary. You want to wrap up the argument and refer to the thesis, but don't restate it or copy and paste it or summarize it or anything like that. You just want to reference kind of the idea behind the paper in your conclusion. But then you have to present a new appeal. And it's an appeal to needs or values, which we'll talk about as we talk more specifically about conclusions, one step at a time. You want to make sure that, think of it as like your final appeal, your most strongest appeal to logic or pathos or ethos or whatever you want to throw into there. But do not repeat information that came into the paper earlier. That's something, a summary conclusion is something that should only be used for very large papers where the reader might forget what the paper was from the beginning to the end, like maybe a doctoral thesis or a master's thesis that you might write later on. These are very short papers, so you definitely don't need a summary conclusion.